Hey everyone, welcome to another instructional video. In this one, I'm going to be demonstrating for you guys how I'm achieving a photorealistic skin texture. I find it usually a difficult question to answer when people ask how to draw skin texture because there's hundreds of different types of skin or more. I don't know how many types there are. But every drawing is different in some way. So the skin texture for Mike Tyson is going to be completely different step than what I did for Leonardo DiCaprio, or the smooth skin texture of Angelina Jolie. But in this video, I'll be explaining some of the steps that I took to achieve at least this little part of the skin and how I achieved the skin texture on this part. So let's dive right into it. So the first thing that I'm doing here is laying down some charcoal powder, and I know that seems like a pretty common theme for my drawings, but I use a lot of charcoal powder. So like I said, the first thing I'm doing is filling in the cheek with this charcoal powder, and just what I'm doing here actually with that pencil is trying to fix a blemish on the cheek. I think maybe I got something dirty on the page, and every time I wipe that area with the brush, it creates a straight line across the cheek. So I'm gonna have to find a way to blend that into the cheek. Not a big deal at all. So the next thing I'm doing here is actually blocking in some of the larger pores and shapes on the cheek. Okay, so I refer to this as anchoring. I don't know if this is a real drawing term or not, but it's very important to lock in the location on the page of as many details, or as many details, I guess, as you can. And the reason for this is so that you don't lose your mind trying to copy it onto the page. Now what I'm doing is I'm looking at the reference and I'm trying to isolate, I guess you could say, some parts of the cheek that I can stick onto the cheek and outline them so that I know that they're there, and I can work around them. So it really helps with the proportions of everything, and it just sort of helps create now an even more detailed outline. So it's important to create an outline before you even start your drawing, but you can almost think of this little mini step as a little mini outline for the cheek, so to speak. So here I'm just using a 4B graphite pencil to lock in some of these larger droplets of water, and I'm actually trying to pay as close attention as I can, even for the smaller ones. So the more little circles that I can accurately lock onto the cheek, the easier it's going to be to fill in some of these details in between, because you're going to get less mentally lost in the mess of it all. And for this step, it's also not extremely important what grade of graphite pencil you're using. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to use graphite. In a second, I'm going to switch to Pit Oil Pencil by Faber-Castell. Really, what you're trying to achieve here is just that outline. If you find that the lines are too dark, then you can consider going with a slightly lighter pencil, maybe a harder pencil, harder graphite pencil perhaps. So here I'm just continuing to find some structures on the face, trying my best to find any little patterns on the face that I can isolate and anchor onto the page and sort of forget about. The more of these little things that I can put on the page, accurately at least, they don't have to be the perfect shape, just the location of them on the cheek is what's most important here. The easier it's going to be to fill in some of that texture in between each droplet later on. So now I'm going in with the Posca white acrylic marker, 0.7 millimeter tip, and I'm just adding that shiny spot now in the middle of each droplet that I see. And I'm just going in between each droplet very, very gently, making the tiniest little dots that I possibly can in between each dot, like a stippling technique almost. So I'm just going to be following this process for the next few minutes. And if you're using your Posca marker and it's not really working as well, put that cap back on, give it a shake, test it back out. One thing that you will probably notice is that the dots are much closer together when you get closer under the eye where it's brighter white, and the dots are very spread apart when you get closer to the nose. Okay, so this creates a sort of gradient effect and is pretty much what the stippling technique is based on. This is how you create gradient effects when you're doing stippling. Now, I've never done stippling, but it just happens to work out for this portrait. So I'll be following pretty much this exact same step till about the 16-minute mark. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the Tombow mono eraser to lighten up some of the areas between the dots, basically erasing some of that charcoal powder layer at the very bottom away. Now, before I did that, I made sure to blow on the page to make sure that the acrylic paint from the marker was dry so that I'm not ripping off the paint. So here I'm lightening up some of the charcoal powder between the dots, and the paint is staying there. And this in itself creates a little bit additional skin texture so that it doesn't look quite as simplified as a charcoal layer put down with some white dots in between. So lightening up some of that charcoal powder will create a little bit of variety for your eye as well to make it look a little bit more natural and realistic. And what I'm doing here is I'm now going in between the droplets with a hard 2H pencil, and I'm adding some very tiny little circles again. So these are circles that were too small to anchor down in the first step, but I can add them in after the fact because you can easily do this step on top of the acrylic. It goes very nicely on top. So this is actually almost the exact same step that I followed for the water droplets video I made a couple weeks ago on the forehead. This is actually pretty much the same process that I made in my water droplets video not too long ago. But I am finding it a little bit different because the water droplets don't seem as pronounced to me, and the details look a little bit more confusing and tiny. So I'll see if I can figure it out. Anyway, hope you guys learned something. My next video is going to be a continuation on this, how to do skin texture that's got nothing to do with the water droplets.